Hereby call this meeting to order. Today is December 12, 2017. This is the District School Board of Indian River County Superintendent's Workshop. And the purpose of this workshop is for the superintendent and district staff to present items to the school board. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Mr. Superintendent.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, the purpose of the workshop is to share information. We have two items on the agenda tonight, two presentations that we will make. The first is a presentation of a draft possible template for the superintendent's evaluation and a draft of a possible timeline to follow implementing the evaluation process. The second presentation will be about the student progression plan or the pupil progression plan. Each year by statute we are bound to implement changes to the pupil progression plan based on changes that the legislature implements and also changes that the Department of Education puts forth for districts to follow and implement. Some of the changes sometimes are the result of our actions and direction and that kind of thing. So staff will make a presentation about the suggested changes to the pupil progression plan for this year. There is a period of public input. We actually have a public hearing and all that kind of thing. So there's a process involved anytime we make changes to the pupil progression plan. So this is one of the steps in that process where we share that information with you. But the first presentation is about the superintendent's evaluation template and possible changes to the timeline. The board may recall that during the summer when we were engaged in the superintendent's evaluation process, the board at the time expressed some dissatisfaction in the template or the form that was being used to conduct the evaluation. That was a template that had been used for several years, never been really addressed or changed or anything like that. I recall direction from the board was to take a look at possibly changing that, maybe finding something that ties more to our performance goals, maybe the goals of the strategic plan or something like that. In fact, I remember a discussion at a subsequent board meeting where direction was given to research some possible other district evaluation templates, and I think there was even the comment, have the superintendent give some input, maybe he can pick one that he thinks works, bring that back to the board for discussion. So that's what we're doing today. You may recall that Ms. Esplin did send the board, I think it was 5 or 6 different templates that are used by school districts throughout Florida to evaluate their superintendents. And so I spent some time looking over those, decided to pull one and bring it forward today as a template. The proposal that you have in front of you is based very closely off of the evaluation template that is used in Pinellas County, and they've used it for several years. And one of the things I liked about the template was it started out with 5 goal areas. We talked a lot about how I believe my evaluation should be tied to the accomplishments associated with the strategic plan. There are 5 goal areas of the strategic plan. So I was like, wow, that fits perfectly. We could plug in those 5 goal areas. It also has 3 other performance areas that we can address, that superintendent stuff to see if I'm doing the things properly. So I took the Pinellas County document and adjusted it to reflect our goals in our strategic plan and that kind of thing. And so I have that prepared to share with you today. So if you want to take a look at the first page of the document, just is the name and so forth, and then it kind of describes the accountability ratings. 5 performance levels: outstanding, meets expectation, acceptable/satisfactory, improvement expected, or unsatisfactory. And then there's a description for each of those. There's also a sentence or two that talks about how documents could be presented to show levels of performance in those areas. And then a little bit of a description at the bottom about how we would use the process. Each individual board member would rate the superintendent on those different areas and turn that in, and there would be a composite score calculated for each of those performance areas. Any questions on the cover page?
I do have a question. You did ask staff to let them know, so I didn't know if you wanted to.
Yes, Dr. Jones.
Am I supposed to be in here?
You are welcome to stay, but your part of the presentation probably won't occur until at least 1:30.
I'm so sorry.
So you could.
Thank you, everybody. They're all gonna see me.
All right. So again, any questions on on the cover page. All right. So we move to the second page, and this is the standard template that would be used for the next 5 district goals, superintendent/district goals. The goal is stated to the right, and our first goal in our strategic plan is student success. Every student receives a high-quality education that is grounded in high expectations, personalized to meet his or her needs and interests, and backed by the necessary learning supports. That's our goal statement. You may recall that the board has approved my superintendent's goals, which start with the goal statement, but then flesh out what the strategies are and what the measurables are. So underneath the second box there, it says superintendent has provided documents, so I will provide documents to support this area. Documents can be found in the final superintendent's goals assessment. So remember that as part of the process, I do have to present my goals to you at the end of the year as accomplished or not accomplished and those types of things. So that would be serve as the proof or the documentation for this goal area and all the subsequent goal areas. So again, that's how this template is laid out. And there's a rating of 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then comments and that kind of thing there. This is the same template for the first 5 areas, the different goals. So page 3.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
We do this evaluation before the end of June, right?
Well, in the current timeline, it is before June 30th, correct?
Well, I guess my question is, we have the numbers on so that we can measure student success before we fill this form out?
We would have some of the numbers. Now, the second document we were going to look at today is the timeline.
Mm-hmm.
The proposed timeline moves the evaluation into July, the final summative evaluation into July. We typically receive all student performance scores, except for the graduation rate, in mid-June. School grades usually come out the 2nd or 3rd week in June.
Mm-hmm.
So if we adopted the timeline, the
Okay.
proposed timeline, that would be the final summative evaluation would not happen until after all the student performance scores minus graduation rate are in.
It'd be nice to have that information if we're going to grade you on it.
Correct, yeah. So again, the superintendent's goals, you remember the first whole set of goals was all about student performance. So,
Okay.
all right. So if you move to page 3, which is goal area 2, culture and climate, staff and students thrive in positive learning environments, positive work environments, where they feel safe, supported, and celebrated. Again, documentation would be provided with the superintendent's goals. Remember, we have that accountability framework that we're using to measure our progress in all of the 5 goal areas on the strategic plan. And the superintendent's goals framework has, again, a lot of those measures in it, well, actually all of those measures in it. So again, when I present my progress on those goals at the end of the year, you would have all this information ready to make, a judgment call, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and comments and that kind of thing. When you get to the next section, high-quality workforce, again, this is tied to the measurables that are in the strategic plan and the accountability framework. Employees are at the heart of our student success, and we will attract, support, and retain a high-quality workforce. As we outlined the strategic plan and then the superintendent's goals, everything follows along in that format. What we're hoping to accomplish, we're measuring as we go out throughout the year. So my performance would be tied to the performance, our accomplishments on the strategic plan and the accountability framework. So again, all this would be supported by those documents. Communication and engagement, goal area 4. District uses communication and engagement to build awareness and trust, which lead to stronger relationships that benefit student learning. Again, that's the goal area, and then underneath that there are strategies, all outlined in the superintendent's goals and outlined in the strategic plan. And we have measurables for all these areas. So we can say, yes, we hope to accomplish this. Remember, some of it's 2% growth in this or that. Some of it's the establishment of certain things and procedures, but all of them are measurable. And then the last goal area is strategic partnerships. Build strong partnerships with all stakeholders in our community. Building strong partnerships with all stakeholders in our community is vital to our success. Again, there's measurables involved there. How many community partnerships do we have? Have we established any new ones? There are measurables like volunteer hours. Have our volunteer hours increased and that kind of thing? So all of these different goal areas have measurables that are part of the strategic plan and the superintendent's goals. We have the accountability framework to measure all of that. So those first 5 measures are tied directly to the strategic plan. That was a weakness with the previous document, wasn't aligned to the strategic plan. It didn't spell out any of the superintendent's goals. Remember, in the past, we had superintendent's goals and we didn't have a strategic plan. And the evaluation document just said progress on the strategic goal, on the superintendent's goals, but didn't really say anything about each individual goal area. So this ties everything. The first 5 areas I'm going to be measured are the first 5 areas of the strategic plan and the superintendent's goals. Then the next 3 areas, pages 7 through 10, 7 through 9 actually, are more general management, general leadership types of qualities and areas of performance. So that first one is impact rapport building. So it builds favorable public image of the district and the superintendency, maintains visibility at school sites and throughout the school district, maintains visibility in the business community, and skilled in conflict resolution, consensus, compromise building, while maintaining professional demeanor and the self-esteem of others. So these are, more of the role of the superintendent in the community. Is he out there doing these things? Is he or she able to, solve these conflicts and problem solve and all those types of things? So that's not necessarily measured in the 5 strategic goal areas, but this is something that I would hope you would want the leader of the district to be doing at a high level.
Sure.
You recognize.
Could you repeat that again on D, skilled in conflict resolution? So would this apply to parents and as issues arise? Would this apply here, or would that go back to, let's see.
It could come in communication and engagement, but more than likely solving an issue is going to fall here.
And that's across the board or anything. What area would you find, would I be able to find transparency on?
So the first one says builds a favorable public image of the district and superintendencies there. There's one coming up about communication and trust.
Okay, so either, because I don't want to, let's say if that's my area that I feel that we're the weakest on, and I'm not saying that, but let's say it is. So if transparency could be here and here, I don't want to demerit you on both of them. So how can I make sure that, would you rather that be on?
That's going to be up to the evaluator to decide where to rate something. Almost all these qualities are interdependent. They're going to be found in more than one area. If we're doing really well at communication and engagement, then hopefully I'm doing some things well in communication and engagement. So it's going to show up under the goal 3, communication and engagement, but it's also going to 4, and it's also going to show up here. So, I think you're going to see some of the similar performance areas or qualities reflected in more than one area.
Yes.
Tell me what you mean by transparency in his review, just one item.
Just making sure that whenever we have an agenda, that there's all the backups inside it, and that it's very transparent of what the request is. For example, with Aon, you had asked for specific numbers and not just the contract. So that was, that was a little lack of transparency of what was really being asked for. I mean, there's so many different areas. Like if let's say budget, if I wanted to know specifically what is that account for, but it's never provided to me. So that to me seems like a lack of transparency of what I'm actually voting on. So I just wanted to make sure that I knew what area to plug that in. It's getting better, but I just want to make sure that I know where to put that if I need to.
Transparency to me just seemed like a catchword that everybody's using
Right,
now,
right.
and I just wanted to, be
So
able to watch
what's
you.
the
I need
definition?
clarification.
How do you, and that might be good to define it.
It was just a question.
Right.
Because
This
it's
is
something that
Justice.
everybody in
Yes.
government uses.
Chairman
We've got to
Frosty.
be transparent. Can't be transparent, I guess, but anyway.
I think
That
specifically.
wasn't criticism, excuse me, yeah. Go ahead.
Okay. I think specifically when we talk about transparency, I do agree with you, that's kind of a fuzzy word, right? It's kind of hard to define, and so I think it's interesting you asked for some clarification on that, because I think sometimes I would think it's a lack of specificity. So what I've found to be the case is that if I ask for additional information regarding an agenda item, I've never had any issue in receiving that information. So rather than a lack of transparency, it's asking for some clarification about the details of a specific item. And so I think it was good that you asked for that clarification.
Well, you know, to me, when items come up on the agenda or whatever, I don't think the superintendent or the staff that puts it together can give you every single detail and cover every single question that you or I, especially you or I, may ask. But, so I just
Right.
want to find out about
Right,
transparency.
and
So that was good.
That might be your definition, but I appreciate if you wouldn't speak for me.
Oh, I
So
wasn't,
thank
I was
you.
speaking for myself.
Thank you.
I didn't speak for you, did I?
No.
Oh, just checking, okay. All right.
All right.
I'm through now with that.
The rails.
Any other questions on impact/rapport building? All right, so the next area is integrity. Models consistent, ethical, personal, and professional conduct, develops high level of openness and trust with board members, staff, and community. That's probably where you'll find your transparency. Considers needs of students foremost when making recommendations to the board. Maintains consistency and interaction with staff, board members, and community. Again, these are the qualities and characteristics you would want in someone leading your organization, that kind of thing. So I thought it would be appropriate to have them as part of the evaluation template. And again, 54321, areas for comments, that kind of thing. I'll provide documentation to support, how well I believe I'm performing in these areas and areas for improvement as well. Same thing with impact and rapport building.
So before we move on, this is probably the most likely area, and what I like about this is it maintains consistency in interaction with staff. So if one board member were to request information and not get it, and they felt they weren't being treated equally as other board members, that might be the area in which one would couch this. So perhaps this is some place to think about that. That's where I would put it. If I felt as I reach out to the superintendent and ask for backup, I usually receive it. In fact, I've pretty much always received it. So this might be the best place to address that, to answer your question very directly.
Can I
Mrs. Orr.
address this?
Sure.
It seems like you might not have a problem and you might not have a problem. And so I would like Dr. Rendell to please speak to this, because we know that it takes several months for me to get this information. I'm not just pulling this out of the sky. So I really don't appreciate this right now, but I would like you to speak to the fact that you have agreed that it's taken too long to get certain information that I've asked for.
Mr. Frost, I'm sorry,
Mrs.
we're going
Justice.
through the superintendent's evaluation. I feel like maybe this is a conversation for a different time.
Well, I don't,
Mr.
because
Chair.
you put these little digs in, well, I don't have a problem, and I don't have a problem. Well, I wouldn't either if I got the information. So in private meetings, Dr. Rendell, he apologizes, and he says to me that he's sorry, that he agrees it's taken too long to get this information. So it's, I just want to go on the record that him and I have talked about this extensively. It's not.
Yes, I don't have a problem saying that there are times when I've said to Mrs. Zork that it seems like it's taken too long to get some information.
And I wouldn't characterize things as digs, and I certainly, and I'm not going to speak for anyone other than myself and say that there was certainly no digs intended, and I didn't perceive there to be any. And I understand your interest in addressing this issue. So
That's where you get.
that's where we will do it, yeah. And also, to Mrs. Justice's point, we're just going through the instrument now, not the
Right.
evaluation. So,
So let's stick
although there
to
seems
that.
to be some foreshadowing here.
Yeah, let's stick
Thank
to
you.
it.
Dr. Rendell.
Sure. Anything else on that page? All right, the last performance area is work standards. Insists on effective performance from associates and subordinates, selects personnel who possess integrity and qualifications for key management positions, relates all activities and decisions to the mission of the district, establishes courses of action, should be courses of action which result in higher performance of students, and orders priorities and insists upon quality control and cost effectiveness. Again, you know, for someone leading an organization, I believe these are the kind of qualities that you would want to measure someone's performance on. There are measurables for plenty of these, you know, to show what level of performance that I believe I'd be at when we get ready to do the final evaluation. And then the last page is just a summary page where general comments from the evaluator would go and that kind of thing, and then there's a signature block at the bottom. You know, this is a proposed template. You know, it's tried and true, has been used in other districts. I did adapt it to fit our 5 strategic goal areas. I did make some other changes in some of the verbiage in some of the pages and that kind of thing. I believe, Ms. DiAgresta, if we were to say we wanted to go to a different evaluation template, such as this one, would that require board action at a future business meeting?
Yes, it will require the board to approve the instrument that you plan to use. In the employment agreement with Dr. Rendell, there's a provision that you're to work together to come up with it, but if for some reason you're unable to reach full agreement, then the board takes action and adopts the instrument it wishes to use. So by all means, you know, once you're done with your discussions and making any changes that you feel are appropriate, then the board would take action at a board meeting.
Okay, so at this point, it's probably appropriate to ask if there are any questions or comments about the instrument and recommendations for amendment.
Looks okay to me. I love this last page.
2,000 words, single space. Have a Gordon Rule booklet for you to take home with you.
I guess the only question I would have is, can we go ahead and get it set up if we sort of, you don't count the nods or anything, but if we can get it done, can we go ahead and get it in place, get it on the agenda?
The idea would be if there aren't significant changes to the template, if we were going to move forward with this template, I'd put it up for adoption at the January board business meeting.
Has Ms. Simchek seen this? Because she's the one that really brought the idea up.
Yes, I talked with her by phone. She had looked over all the documents for today's meeting and tonight's meeting. She didn't say yay or nay. She said, I saw it, it made sense to me, that kind of thing, but I can't say.
She's aware of what the instrument looked like, because she is the
Correct.
one that brought it up, I think.
And if it
change.
were to come, you know, if it were to come to the board for approval in a January business meeting, she will
Yeah.
be able to give her input and say yay or nay.
Mrs. Justice?
Would it be the chair that would be bringing this before the board as an agenda
Yes.
item for approval,
Right,
rather than the superintendent?
correct. The superintendent, in concert with the chair, the chair, in concert with the superintendent, creates the agenda, and, you know, the final decision is then on the chair.
Yeah.
Mrs. Zork?
I do like this. It's a good format. It's very understandable. And my question is on number 3, where it says acceptable and satisfactory. I believe in your contract it says satisfactory. So do we just want to eliminate acceptable? The word?
Do you have any feedback on that?
I'm fine. That's,
Okay. Any other thoughts, concerns? Right, so I guess the guidance is strike acceptable and leave it as satisfactory.
Can I have some clarification? I'm
Sure.
sorry, I apologize. Can I just have some clarification as to why? No, Mrs. Zork, I'm sorry, I'm
Mrs.
asking that
Zork.
of you.
It's a legal question based on the contract, so I'd like to turn that over to Suzanne.
What's the question?
The question is the purpose for using specifically the term satisfactory in isolation
Does-
regarding the contract? Is there something in the contract that dictates that?
In the contract, doesn't it have specific wording that we have to use? So I just want to make sure that we match the specific wording in the contract.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, you are recognized, of course.
Thank you.
Anytime a question is directed to
The
you.
employment contract with Dr. Rendell has a provision in it with regard to the evaluation that provides that if the superintendent's overall evaluation is satisfactory or better, then the superintendent is eligible for the same percentage wage increase as other district administrators, within the school district. So it is important to, somewhere in the evaluation instrument, to define what we consider to be satisfactory, that level, so that we can then know if Dr. Rendell has met that standard for being eligible for a percentage wage increase. But the board can kind of say where it falls in the.
Mr. Chairman?
Mrs. Justice?
Yes, sir, thank you. So would that be for an overall score, as far as satisfactory being a 3 versus within each subgroup? Do you understand?
The language of the contract does speak to the composite evaluation. So it wouldn't necessarily have to be on each page, but it would be the composite that the chairman would create after all board members had prepared their instrument and filled it in and submitted it to the board office. The chairman would then create that composite overall score, which would then, at some point, we would need to figure out if it was satisfactory or greater. Of course, if you wish to talk to Dr. Ridd about revising the employment contract to use a different word or something like that, I mean, we can certainly work through that issue, but I believe Mrs. Zork's point is we want to be sure we define somewhere
Sure.
in the instrument whether we've met that standard.
Thank you.
That's fair. Is it essential to have acceptable in there for you?
No, I just wanted some clarification as to
Fair enough.
the revision.
So we're going to eliminate acceptable.
That's the, yes.
I like that.
I think Dr. Rendell, when he brings it, it will not be there.
Okay.
That's what will probably appear on the agenda sometime in the future. I have a couple questions if no one else does. Does anyone else have further questions?
No, when
Until after you.
we do this, I
Mrs.
do
Zork?
want to have this in a format so that I can type it out versus,
Sure,
Correct.
yes, definitely.
Right.
If you've seen my handwriting in like past evaluations, that is
it was
essential to
terrible,
this
mine
board
was
member as
last
well.
time.
Dr. Rendell,
It's a
please.
Word document.
Okay,
Fantastic.
thank
Send it to you
you.
as a PDF, but it's a Word document.
Excellent. That's most helpful. Great question. Anything else? Okay. I have a couple questions. Dr. Rendell, you selected this from Pinellas. How is the superintendent of Pinellas performing these days?
I can't speak for his individual ratings, but he was just named Superintendent of the Year.
Okay.
I don't know if it has anything to do with.
I don't know if it does, but
the
at least we're
template.
not picking the worst superintendent in the state.
Right, yeah, Dr.
Jefferson
Grego is a well-respected, highly regarded superintendent. He's in his second post. He led Osceola County for several years, then retired, and Pinellas lured him out of retirement several years ago. He's doing a great job.
Okay. And members, I would direct your attention to the comments section. It says comments are required for a rating of 2 or below, which makes sense if you're going to give someone a hit, that their improvement is expected. Communicating that expected improvement, I think, is a good factor. Of course, 3 and above comments are also welcome. But just was wondering if there was any discussion around that, or if we're good with that. Mrs. Justice.
No, I'd just like to say that as we continue to do different work across the district and different committees and in changing some of the different things to align with the strategic plan, I am very happy to see the superintendent's evaluation to also align with the plan and with the accountability framework. So, I did my best last year in doing the evaluation to try to tie it directly to some of the things that were happening in the district, but it certainly was more challenging, and I think that this will prove to be an easier and more efficient way of tying the work we do in the district and the superintendent's work and evaluating it. So I'm hopeful this will be very good for the district.
Thank you for those comments. Anything else? Want to take a brief recess? or-
No, if we
Oh, we
could
have an
move to the
adoption
second
timeline.
document, yes.
Right.
So one of the other discussions that board members had during the evaluation process was when we got time to do the summative evaluation in June, some performance data had not arrived. We had a board meeting towards the end of June, and that was the last board meeting in June, and by contract, the board had to complete the evaluation process by June 30th. So we were kind of bound to make some kind of decision on the superintendent's evaluation, and there was some data maybe that wasn't in. And so what I did was took a look at the existing calendar dates and pushed some of those back so that we would be able to have all performance data in place before you're asked to do the final summative evaluation. So some of the changes are that the adoption of the instrument, that was previously in August because we were using the standard instrument every year and that kind of thing. So I've changed that to January 23rd. So if you were to adopt the draft template that we just went through, that would be on the business meeting on the 23rd. So you would adopt it then. You can't really take any action on the process until you've adopted the instrument. So the mid-year review would be moved from January to February. In the past, the mid-year review was encouraged to happen in January. Well, you could do a mid-year review, but not with that template if it hadn't been approved. So the mid-year review, I pushed that to February on the timeline. May is the same. That's the annual physical I have to turn in by May. And then these dates, the process dates for the final evaluation, push them really from June dates to July dates. So that gives us time. As I said earlier, all of the student performance data should be in by the third week in June. It's usually when school grades come out, and that's the last of the student performance data. We usually get third grade results earlier, right at the end of May or early June, because we have to make decisions about third grade summer school and that kind of thing. But most of those other performance indicators don't come out until mid to late June. So that's why those dates are now in July. So we would have, the annual progress report before July 2nd. That's a Monday, I believe. So we'd give you progress report on my goals, which would really be tied towards student performance. Then you get the form, which is the template. You have to get it to the chair by 7/13. And then we have a board meeting on July 24th, where the final summative evaluation would be, summative performance assessment would be adopted, approved, or so on. And then the goal setting and everything follows along after that for 18-19.
I do have a question.
Mrs. Zerk, you're recognized.
Would you prefer in February, since I've not been through a mid-year discussion with you for your mid-year review, is it just us talking about your goals, or would you rather us try to use the template and give it to you? How would you like that?
So the current contract encourages a mid-year review, if I remember.
It's actually silent on that issue. That was
It's
something
in the timeline.
that you
It
and
was
the
in
board
the-
members discussed.
And it was in the previous timeline.
Yes.
Right, and it just says encourages a mid-year review. It doesn't have, any process for that. The idea of waiting until this template is adopted kind of gives you the opportunity to use the template in the mid-year review.
Well, I think this is a good opportunity. I think this is also a good opportunity, Dr. Rendell, to point out that the school board doesn't just reach out to you in February on issues or,
Right.
With our hands in our pockets. We actually, would you characterize it as constant communication with school board members?
Yeah, well, we're in touch weekly for sure. We have at least 2 different meetings a month and that kind of thing. Even though we're going to 1 business meeting a month, we're still going to be meeting on the second Tuesday of the month for workshops. We have special called meetings if we need to. When we get into the budget process, we're in constant communication about the budget and that kind of thing. So yeah, no, it's not like I don't see you guys till February.
Okay, good.
I have one question that sort of relates to this, but I know when the contract, or at the end of the year, we do this and we act on renewing the superintendent's contract. At what point do we go back and change the contract? And the reason I'm asking is because, we keep renewing the same old things, and I think the superintendent's already met a number of those things that were in the contract, like being
Certified.
certified or whatever. And
Superintendent.
it just looks to me like maybe we ought to update the contract, not change the period of time that he's hired for or anything like that, but at some point we need to address that.
I believe Mr. Agresta has some guidance on that.
Yes, I actually spoke with Dr. Rendell about this, as if the board was interested in revising timelines similar to this, that I would also recommend that we have the board approve an amendment to the employment agreement that changes the deadlines in the agreement to align with whatever you're interested in approving. The other piece of the agreement that you've kind of discussed a little bit today, but isn't necessarily in this timeline, is the time frame for the board. Right now, in Dr. Rendell's employment agreement, by June 30, the school board has the ability to take action or not take action about having the contract roll for an additional year. Currently, Dr. Rendell's employment agreement is through 2019, June 30 of 2019, and so of June 30 of 2018 is the next deadline, if you will, for the contract to possibly roll to June 30 of 2020. So there's always those 2 years in front of the superintendent for his employment agreement. If you're interested in changing your timelines to this July period, I would want to know if the board had any interest and if Dr. Rendell had anything to share about also shifting the time period for contract renewal to a July 30 to align with these evaluation timelines that you're discussing, or making it something other than June 30, because I think, Mr. Searcy, you're the one who raised that the board is being asked to take action with regard to a contract without really having all of this evaluation information. So perhaps tying those two timelines closer together. So if you're interested in this kind of a timeline, I would recommend some amendments to these deadlines in the employment agreement to be brought forward at the same time that you approve this timeline.
Any feedback?
What do we do? Madam?
Yes, sir. Let's assume that you like this, for the sake of this discussion, that you like this July time period for an evaluation to occur. Then I would bring forward, submit to the board, and work with the chairman and the superintendent of putting an amendment to the superintendent's employment agreement on the next school board agenda, which would be the January meeting, which changes the current deadlines in the employment agreement that are all back in May and June to align with these July deadlines. And I would also propose an amendment to the section regarding the contract renewal to extend that deadline to a July 30 date as opposed to the June 30 date, which would then take that contract renewal to just after this evaluation process is ended.
And all that information that's in there that was in the first contract, that he has to meet certain standards, those go away. Can you amend the contract, or they will always be in the contract?
Enter into negotiations, right? That would be the approach.
Certainly, the board and the superintendent can agree to other changes in the agreement. I'm not sure exactly what standards that you're referring to.
Well, but being a certified superintendent, I mean, he is certified, and, you know, just useless information in the contract right now. I mean, not that
Vestigial.
is not
It's
useless,
vestigial
but
information.
the verbiage is not necessary in the contract.
Well, and that's certainly a decision of the school board, but if some sort of certification or continuing education in those areas are important,
Yeah.
then you'll want some language in there that speaks to professional development obligations.
Okay, thanks.
Absolutely, sir.
Well, I'm raising my own hand. I get to recognize myself.
Recognized on-
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. I have a concern with moving the date a little bit because in thinking a few steps ahead here, as Dr. Rendell enters the final year of his contract, my concern would be that he may or may not have adequate time to search for another opportunity if we move to that. I mean, if there comes a point where, you know, folks are shopping for superintendents, that's just how it works. There's a season, right? There's a draft period. So I just want to make sure that I 100% agree with the thinking on moving it until after the evaluation. I just want to make sure that in doing so, we're not essentially taking a year of potential employment away from Dr. Rendell. So I'd like your opinion on that.
Sure, I can speak to that. Basically, Ms. DeGrasse and I had a conversation very similar to this when I reviewed these timelines with her. At the board's request to move the final evaluation date into a time period in which you'll have all the results, we have to kind of push it into July. In the contract, it says you have to make a decision about extending my contract or not by June 30th. So we had this discussion. I am totally okay with an amendment to the contract to move that to July 30th. In other words, again, in fact, we talked about having language that doesn't tie it to a date, that says once the final performance evaluation is complete. That way, if you have to move the performance evaluation because state results have been delayed or something like that, then you don't have to make a decision on whether you're extending my contract or not till the final evaluation is complete, whenever that is.
I think
So-
that's better language. Don't-
But the
Yeah.
contract needs to be adjusted to reflect that.
Yes, sir. Yep. And I don't have a problem with
It's
that.
cleaner.
And if the superintendent were to decide to move on to greener pastures or whatever, doesn't the contract call for a 6-month advance notice or something like that? So,
There is a prior, I don't believe it's 6 months.
think
I
it's
thought
6
it was
months.
90
Long time.
days. I thought it
90
was a
days. Maybe 90 days. I
90-day
just remember
notice
something about it.
provision.
Yes,
And then there's a sanction, a contractual sanction if the 90-day notice is not provided. Yes, sir.
I don't have any plans to do that, by the way.
But you never know. I mean, you never know. But I just remember that being in the contract.
Sir.
And,
Yes, sir.
so that would sort of offset Sean's thing. If we decided that he needed to find greener pastures, that's where the change in dates may come in. But
What's
if
wrong
he
with our
decided-
pastures?
Right.
Do we not have green pastures? I thought our pastures
should
were
water
fairly
pastures.
green. We
You're from
water our-
Wauchula, you call them green pastures. So, but anyway,
like our pastures.
I'm fine with this.
Right, so that's not a concern.
Yeah, I mean, basically, to simplify it for everyone, by moving the timeline into July, at board's request, we would need to adjust, well, need to, but I'm okay with adjusting the contract to say, once this is complete. And so that will have to be an amendment to the contract that comes before the board that Suzanne will have to work.
Yes, sir. Yes. Yes, I'm happy to put together a draft and work with the chairman to get that on an agenda.
Would it make sense to solicit other potential amendments to consider at this point, or
Of course, if
in
there
a
are
future
other.
workshop? I know we
I'd like
didn't
Ms.
exactly
Simchak
prepare
to
for this,
be-
but
Yeah, I mean, I feel because Ms. Simchak
It's
isn't
fair.
here right now, and that's not something that we had planned on discussing, that to be respectful of her and her input, that perhaps it would be better to hold that when she's here with us.
good point. So there'll be potentially multiple amendments to a contract at some point in the future. But for now, it seems as though the only area would be the dates, the evaluation. So we'll sort that out.
Mr. Chair, you have a workshop the second Tuesday of January.
January 9th.
So there would
We can
be
agenda it.
perhaps an opportunity to have a discussion then, and that would should leave plenty of time to still be able to put something on that fourth Tuesday business meeting agenda.
Great. Okay. Anything else?
So if there are no other questions about the timeline or the template, that was the first presentation we were going to make today. If there are no further questions, we'll take about a 5-minute break, and then we'll get into the student progression plan.
We are in informal recess for 5 minutes. Call the meeting back to order. Dr. Rendell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The second presentation that we're going to go through today is about the pupil progression plan, or the student progression plan, and these are some changes to the pupil progression plan. Most of the changes are usually a result of action by the state legislature or the Department of Education. Some of the changes are a result of our own work here in the district. Mrs. Pam Dampier, the Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum and Instruction, and her team are going to take us through these changes. Again, this is one step in the process. We're not asking you to approve anything today. We're just sharing information with you today. Ms. Dampier?
Good afternoon.
You're on.
Good afternoon, board members and viewing audience. I would like to introduce the CNI team that will be helping with the presentation today. Dr. Arnett, Director of Career and Tech. We have Mrs. Kelly Basur, Executive Director of Elementary Education. And we have Dr. Peggy Jones, Executive Director of Secondary Education. Today's presentation will highlight the legislative changes that are being updated in the 2017-18 Student Progression Plan. Our first slide.
Change in legislation with Florida Statute 1002.455, amended the eligibility requirements for virtual education in the state of Florida. Instead of a series of restrictive rules which limited who could take virtual education, the statute now reads all students are eligible to participate in virtual education, whether you're homeschooled, coming in from another state. So you're eligible for virtual education immediately. This impacted the student progression plan on 2 pages. On page 11, where it talks about the eligibility requirements for virtual instruction, it simply was changing it to reflect the new statute. And again, on page 12, where the same statute had to be changed in the Indian River Virtual School requirements. Mr. Frost would have remembered all this because we talked about it a little bit at one of the school board meetings.
I did. I could provide a little comment on that, too.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Okay, next up, the new legislation that speaks to the physical education requirement, and that's Florida Statute 1003.455. There is an additional 100 minutes of supervised, safe, and unstructured free play recess each week for students, and that is to be 20 consecutive minutes of free play recess per day. So we added that. The next one is what we know as the FLKRS, the Florida Kindergarten Readiness Screener. There's a new assessment to the FLKRS now. It replaces last year's assessment called the STAR, and the STAR is a early literacy assessment. It is following many of the same requirements of last year's the readiness screener. It must be given in the first 30 days to kindergartners, and it's used to calculate the kindergarten readiness rate for students who were enrolled in VPK. This assessment does cover 3 domains, that's word knowledge and skills, comprehension strategies and constructing meaning, and numbers and operations. The next change is clarifying the language for make sure that we're on this one here. The next change was a change in our kindergarten and first grade academic scale. That is an updated change to the scale, and that was developed internally last year based on a report card committee made up of kindergarten and first grade teachers.
Okay, for secondary updates for middle grades, deals with middle grades promotion. It eliminates requirement that 1 course in career and education planning be completed in 6th, 7th, or 8th grade. And then for high school, end-of-course assessment requirement removes the provision for an Algebra 2 end-of-course assessment, and results constitute as 30% of the student's final grade. Standard high school diploma deletes the requirement that a student must pass the Algebra 2 EOC statewide standardized assessment in order to earn a scholar diploma designation, and deletes the requirement that a student needs to pass a personal fitness competency test with a C or better.
Promotion of students with disability. We added language to reflect the promotional requirement for students with disabilities. Students with disabilities will follow the Florida standards, and they're expected to meet the same promotion requirements as their non-disabled peers. Also, students with disability will follow a modified curriculum as determined by the IEP if they must master the appropriate Florida standards, access points for high school diploma, for their high school diploma. ESOL accommodations, we added such as content-specific glossaries can now be utilized as accommodations on statewide assessments. And we amended the rule effective 5/30/2017 to include the use of bilingual glossary in addition to a bilingual dictionary as an approved accommodation for our ELL students. ESOL program exit options. The annual English language proficiency assessment for English language learners was amended by the State Board of Education on 5/30/2017. Those were the changes. This amendment established new proficiency criteria for our ELL students based on access for ELLs, the State Language Proficiency Assessment. These were our changes from the legislation. Are there any questions?
Well, I'm not sure. On page 3, that may be it indicates there something about STAR program, and you're checking the readiness of students that were enrolled in VPK. Are you tracking the schools or the VPK programs where the students are coming from so that we can, or you can, or somebody can, determine if the VPK program at the various schools is effective? Are you tracking that in any way?
We're not formally tracking that, but I do believe that there's a state report that gives the VPK providers their grade. Yes.
And Brooke Flood is working to try to somehow get that information because we know that would be helpful information for our schools, so when students come in, but right now there is a connection with that.
But wouldn't that be something of interest that we would, to help the superintendent meet his goals if we knew which VPKs were adequate?
So, may I, Mr. Chairman?
Absolutely.
I'm sorry. Okay, so this is an area that I know a little bit about. You know, this STAR test is something that is something that's been needed for a long time. Representative Aaron Grahl has been working hard to try to find some type of test that we can use to see if students are coming to school kindergarten ready. VPK is not only provided by the school district, which we do provide some VPKs, but there's also privately run VPKs, and it's very hard to make sure that they are all of a certain quality. That continues to be a struggle. So there's a lot of attention to making sure that if schools are receiving state funds to run a early childhood education program, that it's high quality. So tying some of those things to the superintendent's goals may not be reasonable because it's not something that we have complete control over. But you should be happy to know that our legislator that represents us in the House is continuing to work with groups such as the Children's Movement and in her pre-K early childhood readiness committees to try to make sure that
I'm happy.
we're getting kids. Oh yeah, you should be happy. It's a step in the right direction.
But there has to be some tracking method so we can know if you've got a VPK that's taking state money or federal money, wherever they get their money from, their students just don't make it, and consistently don't make it.
And that's
because-
that piece that Aaron's worked hard to see so that we can start saying, you know, some of the things that we're doing in our VPKs is a lot of professional development around conscious discipline and different things like that, because we know that students coming to school with some of those skills are more successful. And we hope to be able to raise the bar at all of the different child care facilities and early childhood centers in the county.
Of course, that's something we don't have any control over.
We don't, but as a community, as a child advocate, I'm on the Board of Advisors for the Treasure Coast Children's Movement Council, and so, and very active in kindergarten readiness, and that's something that Brooke Flood, who takes care of all of our VPKs, is we're very, very focused on, and there's a lot of, we're actually a leader, Indian River County is actually a leader across the state in trying to work for more accountability.
Good, thank you.
And I will say that the Department of Education used to keep track and publish those results, but for some reason, a couple of years ago, they stopped collecting those data, as I recall, and stopped publishing them. And there has been a push by Representative Grahl and others in the education committees to bring back that accountability piece to it so that, you know, parents can make better informed decisions on where they take their voucher, their VPK voucher.
So we need to wait till the state acts on that?
We don't know, absolutely not,
Go
but
in on
that's
the
a
state,
significant,
that could be a-
I don't disagree, and that's something that's been, you know, I candidly, I've been working on for the last couple of years, but it is one of those that will require significant resources to accomplish those data aggregations and collections.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's something, certainly, you know, Dr. Rendell has heard the board, and if it's something that can be accomplished, if those aggregated score results could be put together, that's something to potentially look into, and then sharing those results as part of our choice program that's coming up.
Just a
Right.
thought.
No, and Mr.
Mrs. Justice?
Yes, sir. So there's something called the Kindergarten Readiness Collaborative. I'm sorry, Mr. Stork, I can't see Mr. Searcy. I just wanted to tell him. There's something called the Kindergarten Readiness Collaborative. It's a group of different community leaders that have come together to try to help to support early childhood education. They've just hired an executive director, and they continue to move in the right direction as far as not only VPK, but all child care centers are raising the bar. So there is a grant that was provided for the conscious discipline professional development. Child Care Resources is giving some trainings to different educators across the county. So we should be seeing, and we are already seeing children coming into kindergarten with the tools in their toolbox they need. We're on the right track.
And that group is going to be able to determine the better
Yes.
VPKs?
That is the goal. The goal is to not necessarily identify the better VPKs, but to take all of the different child care, early childhood centers that are taking care of children in the county and to bring them all up together.
Okay.
Because the funding for VPK is limited. That is not an area.
Small.
And they just
It's so small.
spread, the more VPKs that open, the thinner the money gets. 'Cause don't they just share a certain pot of money? And then if you
No,
get
it's
one-
because it's by
Per student.
That's Title I.
students, so they
Okay.
compete for them, which is in some places a good.
But certainly advocating for more money in the VPK program so that we can run more VPKs would be.
It's constitutionally funded. It's a tricky one. Mrs. Ork, did you have anything?
I did. I think it goes back to that most parents don't understand that there are ratings out there for the VPK. And if there was some way that we could partnership with the grades and able to get that information out to the parents, I think maybe not using the data that we collect to get the information out, but go ahead and maybe post something that gives the rating, so when parents are thinking of their child's education, they can go on to our website and they can see that we have that posted on there. And
We probably wouldn't host the posting of the grades or the ratings there on our website. We would probably have a link to the Kindergarten Readiness Collaborative's website or something like that.
Yeah.
You know, we really have increased our partnership with the local preschool providers. When we've had the kindergarten roundup the last 2 years, they have been a part of that. And we've put out to the community that there's going to be resources there, not just for kindergartners, but even for their younger siblings. And there were a lot of enrollments in preschool programs that happened at kindergarten roundup. So families with kindergartners were showing up to register for kindergarten, but then they were also enrolling their younger siblings in pre-K right there. In fact, I think, you know, the traffic at the pre-K tables was just as thick as at the kindergarten tables. So, but I think, you know, we wouldn't host the ratings, but we would have a link to where
Right.
people could get that information.
right. And that's fine. Just
Good
getting
idea.
the information out there, I think that's,
Ms. Searcy?
Yeah, on page 5, I guess it's the third bullet down, or second bullet down, standard high school diploma, deletes the requirement that a student must pass out of 2 statewide end-of-course exam, and standardized assessment in order to earn a scholar diploma designation. Does that mean an attendance, you attended school and you have a diploma, and what that means?
So a scholar diploma designation was added by the state several years ago. If you have a certain GPA and you've earned certain requirements and passed certain tests, you've got a scholar designation on your diploma. It's actually a sticker that you could affix to your diploma. So, you know, basically they're just removing the Algebra 2 EOC as a requirement to get that sticker. Excuse me, that
I think in the past,
distinction.
we had something that you get a certificate of attendance and you still walk and get your
So that's a certificate of completion. That's for someone who hasn't met standard diploma requirements.
And then the last question I have is on page 6 there. Is there any way we could figure out a way, it's in the first bullet there, to change the verbiage on that non-disabled? Is there some other word we can use for that? 'Cause I think they're challenged, but disabled just sort of rubs me wrong. I don't know why, but I understand why you have it in there, but is there some way, and maybe that's what the state says, but
That is what the state.
I think they're special, number one, but if there's some way we could change that to challenged or
Or you could say general education in this instance, I guess. Same promotion requirements as their, is it Justice?
Is it the state that uses the term non-disabled?
I believe they do.
It
Yeah, I
is.
believe that's part of their
Yes.
vernacular.
we can't change that then, but still.
I don't disagree,
Yeah, I don't
seriously.
Okay,
Any other questions,
that's all that I have.
concerns, comments,
I had a question
recipes? Yes.
about the physical education requirement. If we could talk a little bit about how we've integrated that into the day, into the student's day,
The recess requirement?
the recess requirement and the
Okay.
free play, and what the definition of free play is, because I know there were some questions for parents as far as what that definition was, and I know that there was some controversy as far as charter schools not being required to comply with this, because perhaps it was defined as outside, and there was some perception that maybe it was an outside play, and then that it was determined that's not the case. It does not have to be outside, it can be in class.
Anyone speak to that?
We actually collected schedules from all of the schools to make sure that first they were in compliance with meeting the additional 20-minute-a-day requirement, but then also to problem-solve ways to meet that requirement, because the day isn't any longer, and so we're asking 20 more minutes to be devoted to something other than reading, writing, math, and science. So everybody is in compliance at this point, but we met at one of the principals' meetings probably about 2 months ago and brainstormed some ways each of the schools are meeting that requirement. And I think you might have been in attendance at that meeting and spoke to the charter school requirement, because it did come up. And so different schools did have different ways of meeting it. Mostly it was recess. And in other spaces, they are meeting it with not the 20-minute requirement. See, we have two different things at play here. We have the 100-minute, which is new, and that's free unstructured play. And then we have the one from a few years ago, which is 150 minutes a week. And so that was the one we were trying to be a little more creative with time. We used to be able to count that as some recess time as well, but now with the new recess one, we've had to devote recess time to that one, because it is free unstructured play. The original 150-minute requirement really talks about the PE standards. And so different schools were speaking of different ways they're meeting the PE standards, and some of it is not just the physical education side of it, but also the nutritional and health side of it too. So it wasn't so much changing how we meet the 100 minutes a week, which is the new part. It was reframing how we are meeting the 150 minutes a week. Does that answer your question?
Kind of. I mean, I still think, I guess, on the part of parents, there tends to be some confusion as to if there's PE that day, and then, I mean, I think that,
Well,
I think,
and my biggest concern would be, is it taking away from, are we seeing a draw away from academics? Is it hurting?
I think on the days that they have PE, some of the schools are saying, we won't have the 100, the 30 minutes, the minimum a day, because they've already gone out, so then they're using that for more classroom time. But that has always been the case if they have physical ed on those days. It makes no sense for the kids to go out again, for 50, for 50 minutes. So they're still doing the 20 minutes of recess on those days, but if they have PE, they're not doing the 30 minutes minimum because they would have met that criteria with the PE.
And that was the thing when the legislation was moving is, on surface, it seems like a great idea. More recess. In fact, it was my best subject, so I'm a big supporter. But it wasn't just the 100 minutes of recess. There had been a previous mandate of the 150 minutes. So now we're looking at 250 minutes of physical activity per week, and then, the running bet, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, in the rotunda at the time was the recess moms at that point would become lunch moms this year because the assessment was lunches would shrink. Have we adjusted lunch schedules at all?
No, lunch schedule is still the same.
I hope, my kids tell me they barely have, their lunchbox comes home full. I'm like, don't you have time? They have no time to eat, so I hope that's not, we don't shorten lunch.
That's good. That was my second best subject. So.
Our principals, they met with their staff and became creative with, the time that they had within the day and made it work. I was at a school today and they were going out for recess. Normally recess is usually after lunch, or they were going in the morning because they've had to be creative to make sure everybody's not on the playground at the same time during recess. So it's just, we've encouraged them, and that was part of the scheduling. Meet with your staff, come up with creative ideas, and, make sure you collaborate with them. And then they had to turn it in to Mrs. Basor, and then we verified it with Dr. Rendell to make sure he had to sign off on it to make sure that we were in compliance.
Mr. Searcy.
Is there, has there been any thought given to having recess first thing in the morning? I mean, I've gone by these schools, and I see some very active students out there on the hard court. And is there any way you could have that and maybe get some of that, I can't use my watch term on that stuff, get it out of them early on so they'd be ready to learn?
In fact, probably about half of our elementary schools, that's exactly how they're meeting this requirement.
Good.
And in the ones where they aren't meeting it that way, they have morning running clubs and morning activity groups
Okay.
for the students who get there before school starts,
Okay.
for that very reason.
Is there any number of students required to make it count for that? If some students don't show up until, if they don't do the hard court thing first, or they're waiting for school to kick off, is there any magic number that schools have to hit to meet that compliance piece?
It's not really about surveying the number of students, whatever. It has to be accounted for inside the instructional day.
Right.
So we have to schedule for it. So it's not like we could say, hey, if you come early, we'll have recess for those people. It has to be inside the instructional day. And that's what I sign off on, is the form saying that we've got the minutes accounted for every day, inside the instructional day.
Thank you. Mrs. Justice.
One of the things I know we've talked about before is that there may not be a lot of equality as far as playgrounds at our elementary schools. And I know that, I think the state mandates that we have a field. I don't think that there are any requirements as to what type of play space we have to have for students. But knowing that, number one, now we're giving more time, which means the equipment's going to be used more. I know we talked a little bit before about doing a survey about what do schools have, and I know that it seems like something that would be an extra. But playtime is important, and certainly giving students an opportunity to have things to do on the playground is important. You can run in a field, but at some point you want to go on a swing or something. And so have we done that? I remember discussing this at another workshop.
I'll have to check with Mr. Teskey to see what, every summer we do a walkthrough of all the buildings, and I don't know if we assessed who has what playground equipment, who has a covered play area, who doesn't, that kind of thing. So if that's not something that we normally inventory, I'm sure that's something we can add, so we can start to say, make sure there's equal access to the same types of facilities. I know a covered area is something that we don't have at every elementary school that we've talked about.
Mrs. Zork.
I think to piggyback on Mrs. Justice's comment, though, it doesn't necessarily have to be playground equipment, just making sure there's an adequate amount of, let's say, basketballs or frisbees or other items that can be on the playground besides just that. And I know a lot of times those little loose items disappear quite often, but I do think that we need to make sure all the schools have an adequate amount
Yep.
of that.
Understood, yeah.
Good point. Anybody else? Other comments?
Anything else to present, or does that conclude the presentation?
That is it, but we're going to be doing some work this summer as a team. We've had an opportunity to review our pupil progression plan, and we've had an opportunity to look at some other districts, and we really want to make it a little more user-friendly for our customers. So we're going to be doing some work this summer and when we bring the updates in the fall, it will look different. We want to make it a little more user-friendly for our parents and for our customers out in our viewing audience.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. That concludes our presentations for the workshop.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Anybody have anything else for the good of the order? All right. With that, we are adjourned.